Literature Whiz presents
Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Analysis. Preface and Letters 1 to 4. The preface to Frankenstein sets up the novel as entertainment, but with a serious twist, a science fiction that nonetheless captures the truth of the elementary principles of human nature. The works of Homer, Shakespeare, and Milton are held up as shining examples of the kind of work Frankenstein aspires to be. Incidentally, the reference to Dr. Darwin in the first sentence is not to the famous evolutionist Charles Darwin, who was 7 years old at the time the novel was written, but to his grandfather, the biologist Erasmus Darwin. In addition to setting the scene for the telling of the stranger's narrative, Walton's letters introduce an important character, Walton himself, whose story parallels Frankenstein's. The second letter introduces the idea of loss and loneliness, as Walton complains that he has no friends with whom to share his triumphs and failures, no sensitive ear to listen to his dreams and ambitions. Walton turns to the stranger as the friend he has always wanted. His search for companionship, and his attempt to find it in the stranger, parallels the monster's desire for a friend and mate later in the novel. This parallel between man and monster, still hidden in these early letters but increasingly clear as the novel progresses, suggests that the two may not be as different as they seem. Another theme that Walton's letters introduce is the danger of knowledge. The stranger tells Walton, "You seek for knowledge and wisdom, as I once did, and I ardently hope that the gratification of your wishes may not be a serpent to sting you, as mine has been." The theme of destructive knowledge is developed throughout the novel as the tragic consequences of the stranger's obsessive search for understanding are revealed. Walton, like the stranger, is entranced by the opportunity to know what no one else knows, to delve into nature's secrets. What may not be expected in a country of eternal light, he asks. Walton's is only the first of many voices in Frankenstein. His letters set up a frame narrative that encloses the main narrative, the stranger's, and provides the context in which it is told. Nested within the stranger's narrative are even more voices. The use of multiple frame narratives calls attention to the telling of the story, adding new layers of complexity to the already intricate relationship between author and reader. As the reader listens to Victor's story, so does Walton. By focusing the reader's attention on narration, on the importance of the storyteller and his or her audience, Shelley may have been trying to link her novel to the oral tradition to which the ghost stories that inspire her tale belong. Within each framed narrative, the reader receives constant reminders of the presence of other authors and audiences, and of perspective shifts, as Victor breaks out of his narrative to address Walton directly and as Walton signs off each of his letters to his sister. Chapters 1 to 2. The picture that Victor draws of his childhood is an idyllic one. Though loss abounds, the poverty of Beaufort and the orphaning of Elizabeth, for instance, it is always quickly alleviated by the presence of a close, loving family. Nonetheless, the reader senses, even in these early passages, that the stability and comfort of family are about to be exploded. Shining through Victor's narration of a joyful childhood and an eccentric adolescence is a glimmer of the great tragedy that will soon overtake him. Chapters 3 to 5. Whereas the first two chapters give the reader a mere sense of impending doom, these chapters depict Victor irrevocably on the way to tragedy. The creation of the monster is a grotesque act, far removed from the triumph of scientific knowledge for which Victor had hoped. His nightmares reflect his horror at what he has done and also serve to foreshadow future events in the novel. The images of Elizabeth livid with the hue of death prepare the reader for Elizabeth's eventual death and connect it, however indirectly, to the creation of the monster. Victor's pursuit of scientific knowledge reveals a great deal about his perceptions of science in general. He views science as the only true route to new knowledge. In other studies you go as far as others have gone before you, and there is nothing more to know, but in scientific pursuit there is continual food for discovery and wonder. Walton's journey to the North Pole is likewise a search for food for discovery and wonder, a step into the tantalizing, dark unknown. The symbol of light, introduced in Walton's first letter, what may not be expected in a country of eternal light, appears again in Victor's narrative, this time in a scientific context. From the midst of this darkness, Victor says when describing his discovery of the secret of life, "A sudden light broke in upon me, a light so brilliant and wondrous." Light reveals, illuminates, clarifies. it is essential for seeing, and seeing is the way to knowledge. Just as light can illuminate, however, so can it blind. Pleasantly warm at moderate levels, it ignites dangerous flames at higher ones. Immediately after his first metaphorical use of light as a symbol of knowledge, Victor retreats into secrecy and warns Walton of how dangerous is the acquirement of knowledge. Thus, light is balanced always by fire, the promise of new discovery by the danger of unpredictable, and perhaps tragic, consequences. The theme of secrecy manifests itself in these chapters, as Victor's studies draw him farther and farther away from those who love and advise him. He conducts his experiments alone, following the example of the ancient alchemists, who jealously guarded their secrets, and rejecting the openness of the new sciences. Victor displays an unhealthy obsession with all of his endeavors, and the labor of creating the monster takes its toll on him. It drags him into charnel houses in search of old body parts and, even more important, isolates him from the world of open social institutions. Though Henry's presence makes Victor become conscious of his gradual loss of touch with humanity, Victor is nonetheless unwilling to tell Henry anything about the monster. The theme of secrecy transforms itself, now linked to Victor's shame and regret for having ever hoped to create a new life. Victor's reaction to his creation initiates a haunting theme that persists throughout the novel, the sense that the monster is inescapable, ever-present, liable to appear at any moment and wreak havoc. When Victor arrives at his apartment with Henry, he opens the door as children are accustomed to do when they expect a specter to stand in waiting for them on the other side, a seeming echo of the tension-filled German ghost stories read by Mary Shelley and her vacationing companions. As in the first 3 chapters, Victor repeatedly addresses Walton, his immediate audience, reminding the reader of the framed narrative and of the multiple layers of storytellers and listeners. Structuring comments such as "I fear, my friend, that I shall render myself tedious by dwelling on these preliminary circumstances" both remind the reader of the target audience, Walton, and help indicate the relative importance of each passage. Shelley employs other literary devices from time to time, including apostrophe, in which the speaker addresses an inanimate object, absent person, or abstract idea. Victor occasionally addresses some of the figures from his past as if they were with him on board Walton's ship. "Excellent friend," he exclaims, referring to Henry. "How sincerely did you love me, and endeavor to elevate my mind, until it was on a level with your own." Apostrophe was a favorite of Mary Shelley's husband, Percy Bysshe Shelley, who used it often in his poetry. Its occurrence here might reflect some degree of Percy's influence on Mary's writing. Chapters 6 to 8. Victor's incorporation of written letters into his story allows both Elizabeth and Alphonse to participate directly in the narrative, bypassing Victor to speak directly to Walton and the reader. However, at the same time that the letters increase the realism of the narrative, allowing the reader to hear the characters' distinct voices, they also make the overall narrative less plausible. It is unlikely that Frankenstein would remember the letters word for word, and even more unlikely that Walton would record them as such in his own letters to his sister. Furthermore, there is the question of filtering. The recollections of either Victor or Walton, or both, could be biased, either subconsciously or consciously. The presence of these letters foregrounds the issue of whether or not the narrator is reliable. Women continue to play a mostly passive role in the narrative. Although Elizabeth stands up for Justine's innocence, she, like Justine, is completely helpless to stop the execution. Only Victor has the power to do so, as he is in possession of crucial knowledge that could identify the real killer. It is clear where the power lies in the relationship between Victor and Elizabeth. He makes the decisions, she pleads with him to make the right ones. Appearing in Ingolstadt at just the right moment to nurse Victor back to health, Henry serves as the line of communication between Victor and his family, presenting him with an avenue back to the warmth of society. In asking Victor to introduce him to the professors at the university, however, Henry drags him back into the realm of chemistry, science, and dangerous knowledge that he has just escaped. By accompanying Victor on his walking tour, Henry reawakens in him a sense of health, openness, and friendly society that he had lost during his months of work creating the monster. Henry plays the foil to Victor. He embodies relentless clarity, openness, concern, and good health, in sharp contrast to Victor's secrecy, self-absorption, and ill health. Chapters 9 to 10. These chapters contain some of the novel's most explicit instances of the theme of sublime nature, as nature's powerful influence on Victor becomes manifest. The natural world has noticeable effects on Victor's mood. He is moved and cheered in the presence of scenic beauty, and he is disconsolate in its absence. Just as nature can make him joyful, however, so can it remind him of his guilt, shame, and regret. The rain depressed me, my old feelings recurred, and I was miserable. Shelley aligns Victor with the Romantic movement of late 18th to mid-19th century Europe, which emphasized a turn to nature for sublime experience, feelings of awe, hope, and ecstasy. Victor's affinity with nature is of particular significance because of the monster's ties to nature. Both distinctly at home in nature and unnatural almost by definition, the monster becomes a symbol of Victor's folly in trying to emulate the natural forces of creation. Chapters 11 to 12. The monster's growing understanding of the social significance of family is connected to his sense of otherness and solitude. The cottagers' devotion to each other underscores Victor's total abandonment of the monster. Ironically, observing their kindness actually causes the monster to suffer, as he realizes how truly alone, and how far from being the recipient of such kindness, he is. This lack of interaction with others, in addition to his namelessness, compounds the monster's woeful lack of social identity. The theme of nature's sublimity, of the connection between human moods and natural surroundings, resurfaces in the monster's childlike reaction to springtime. Nature proves as important to the monster as it is to Victor. As the temperature rises and the winter ice melts, the monster takes comfort in a suddenly green and blooming world, glorying in nature's creation when he cannot rejoice in his own. For a moment, he is able to forget his own ugliness and unnaturalness. Like Victor, the monster comes to regard knowledge as dangerous, as it can have unforeseen negative consequences. After realizing that he is horribly different from human beings, the monster cries, "Of what a strange nature is knowledge!" It clings to the mind, when it has once seized on it, like a lichen on the rock. Knowledge is permanent and irreversible. Once gained, it cannot be dispossessed. Just as the monster, a product of knowledge, spins out of Victor's control, so too can knowledge itself, once uncovered, create irreversible harm. Certain elements of the narrative style persist as the perspective transitions from Victor to the monster. Both narrators are emotional, sensitive, aware of nature's power, and concerned with the dangers of knowledge. Both express themselves in an elegant, romantic, slightly melodramatic tone. One can argue that the similarity of their tones arises as a function of the filtering inherent in the layered narrative. The monster speaks through Victor, Victor speaks through Walton, and Walton ultimately speaks through the sensitive, romantic Shelley. However, one can also explore whether the structure of the novel itself helps explain these narrative parallels. The growing list of similarities between Victor and the monster suggests that the two characters may not be so different after all. Chapters 13 to 14. The subplot of Safie and the cottagers adds yet another set of voices to the novel. Their story is transmitted from the cottagers to the monster, from the monster to Victor, from Victor to Walton, and from Walton to his sister, at which point the reader finally gains access to it. This layering of stories within stories enables the reworking of familiar ideas in new contexts. One such idea is the sense of otherness that many characters in Frankenstein feel. The monster, whose solitude stems from being the only creature of his kind in existence and from being shunned by humanity, senses this quality of being different most powerfully. His deformity, his ability to survive extreme conditions, and the grotesque circumstances of his creation all serve to mark him as the ultimate outsider. Victor, too, is an outsider, as his awful secret separates him from friends, family, and the rest of society. In the subplot of the cottagers, this idea recurs in the figures of both Safie and her father. His otherness as a Muslim Turk in Paris results in a threat to his life from the prejudiced and figures in power. Her feelings of being oppressed by Islam's confining gender roles compel her to seek escape to the more egalitarian ideas of Christianity. The monster's fascination with the relationship between Felix and Safie lies in his desperate desire for Victor to accept him. Felix's willingness to risk everything for the sake of someone who has been unjustly punished gives the monster hope that Victor will recognize the hurtful injustice of abandoning him. However, just as Felix's bravery in helping Safie's father escape stands in stark contrast to Victor's shameful unwillingness to save Justine, so does Felix's compassion for Safie underscore Victor's cold hatred for the monster. Language and communication take center stage in these chapters, as the monster emerges from his infantile state and begins to understand and produce written and spoken language. His alienation from society, however, provides him no opportunity to communicate with others. Rather, he is a one-way conduit, a voyeur, absorbing information from the cottagers without giving anything in return. The importance of language as a means of self-expression manifests itself in the monster's encounter with Victor on the glacier. Just as each distinct narrative voice contributes to the novel's richly woven web of illusions and biases, the monster's romanticization of the cottagers as kind and friendly reflects his desperate desire for companionship and affection. Texts play an important role throughout the novel, especially in shaping the monster's conception of his identity and place in the world. As his language skills increase, the monster gains a sense of the world through Felix's reading of Ruins of Empires. In these chapters, he acquires the ability to understand the crucial texts that he soon discovers, including Paradise Lost. This text introduces him to Adam and Satan, to both of whom he eventually compares himself. In addition to shaping his identity, the written word provides the monster with a means of legitimizing his past. In offering to show Victor copies of Safie's letters, he hopes to validate his perspective on the tragedy that has befallen them and thus gain Victor's sympathy. His belief in the truth of the written word, however, seems particularly naive in a novel with a narrative structure as complex as that of Frankenstein, just as he falsely assumes that Paradise Lost is historically accurate. Chapters 15 to 17. Paradise Lost, here and throughout the novel, provides a touchstone for the monster as he tries to understand his identity. Comparing himself to both Adam and Satan, perceiving himself as both human and demonic, the monster is poised uncomfortably between two realms. Like Adam, he says, I was created apparently united by no link to any other being in existence, but many times I considered Satan as the fitter emblem of my condition, for often, like him, when I viewed the bliss of my protectors, the bitter gall of envy rose within me. Scolded like Adam and cursed like Satan, the monster is painfully aware of his creator's utter disdain for him. The monster continues to address Victor directly, reminding the reader of the relationship between the two, the concrete situation in which the monster's story is being told, the hot montanvert, and the complicated narrative structure of the novel. Furthermore, quotes like unfeeling, heartless creator. You had endowed me with perceptions and passions, and then cast me abroad an object for the scorn and horror of mankind serve not only to structure the narrative formally but also to emphasize that the monster has a purpose in telling his story. He wants to elicit a reaction from Victor, or recognition of Victor's responsibility for his disastrous plight. The theme of sublime nature reappears in the monster's narrative, and nature's ability to affect the monster powerfully, as it does Victor, humanizes him. It is worth noting that whereas Victor seeks the high, cold, hard world of the Alps for comfort, as if to freeze, and hence incapacitate, his guilt about the murder, the monster finds solace in the soft colors and smells of a springtime forest, symbolizing his desire to reveal himself to the world and interact with others. Half surprised by the novelty of these sensations, I allowed myself to be borne away by them, and, forgetting my solitude and deformity, dared to be happy, the monster says. Unlike Victor, he is able to push away, at least temporarily, the negative aspects of his existence. Chapters 18 to 20. The contrast, first established in Ingolstadt, between the inwardly focused Victor and the outwardly focused Henry sharpens as the natural world produces differing effects in the two men. Earlier, Henry's interaction with the Frankenstein family and general sociability counter Victor's secrecy and self-isolation. Similarly, his optimism and cheer in the presence of sublime nature now counter the anxiety that Victor feels in knowing that the monster pervades his natural surroundings. For Henry, alive to every new scene, joyful when he saw the beauties of the setting sun, and more happy when he beheld it rise, nature is a source of infinite bliss, while for Victor it has become an unending reminder of his imprudent meddling, and of his responsibility for the tragedies that have plagued him. Chapters 21 to 23. Victor's pattern of falling into extended illness in reaction to the monster suggests that the deterioration of his health is, to some extent, psychologically induced, as if guilt prevents him from facing fully the horribleness of the monster and his deeds. The human frame could no longer support the agonizing suffering that I endured, and I was carried out of the room in strong convulsions. He recounts of his despair at seeing Henry's corpse, making an explicit link between psychological torment and physical infirmity. That Victor also falls ill soon after creating the monster and experiences a decline in health after the deaths of William and Justine points toward guilt as the trigger for this psychological mechanism. Henry again serves as a link between Victor and society, as his death brings Alphonse to visit his son. Nothing, at this moment, could have given me greater pleasure than the arrival of my father, Victor says. As a result of spending so much time in Ingolstadt ignoring his family, and also as a result of the monster's depredations, Victor becomes aware of the importance of interaction with family and friends. Having failed to inspire love in Victor, the monster seeks to establish a relationship with his creator that would force his creator to feel his pain. By destroying those people dear to Victor, the monster, acutely aware of the meaningfulness of social interaction, brings Victor closer and closer to the state of solitude that he himself has experienced since being created. Chapters 24. By this point in the novel, Victor has assumed the very inhumanity of which he accuses the monster. Just as the monster earlier haunts Victor, seeking revenge on him for having destroyed any possibility of a mate for him, Victor now experiences an obsessive need to exact revenge on the monster for murdering his loved ones. Echoes of the monster's earlier statements now appear in Victor's speech, illustrating the extent to which Victor has become dehumanized. "I was cursed by some devil," he cries, "and carried about with me my eternal hell." This is the second allusion to the passage in Paradise Lost in which Satan, cast out from heaven, says that he himself is hell. The first allusion, made by the monster after being repulsed by the cottagers, is nearly identical. "I, like the arch-fiend, bore a hell within me." Driven by their hatred, the two monsters, Victor and his creation, move farther and farther away from human society and sanity. The final section of the novel, in which Walton continues the story, completes the framing narrative. Walton's perception of Victor as a great, noble man ruined by the events described in the story adds to the tragic conclusion of the novel. The technique of framing narratives within narratives not only allows the reader to hear the voices of all of the main characters, but also provides multiple views of the central characters. Walton sees Frankenstein as a noble, tragic figure. Frankenstein sees himself as an overly proud and overly ambitious victim of fate. The monster sees Frankenstein as a reckless creator, too self-centered to care for his creation. Thank you for watching. If you want the videos to continue, all you have to do is like and subscribe. You can share the books you want with us as comments. May the magic be with you.